Welcome to Polka DeFiance. It's the annual online event dedicated to the everything DeFi on Polkadot. And I'm Alex. I'm CEO and founder with the Equilibrium team. We are super excited to host you today with us. This event is brought to you by our colleagues from the marketing team of Equilibrium, Cointelegraph, and Parity. Today we'll be discussing all kind of things related to liquidity, moving value from other chains to Polkadot, back and forth, and everything related to the latest developments of everything related to DeFi and DeFi projects on the basis of the substrate framework. Today we'll have a lot of mindful conversations, thoughtful speakers, and basically representatives from Parity, from all the most influential ecosystem projects. Obviously, like mostly all the Parchains will be with us today. So we're looking forward to hosting them here today with us. And the first talk will be given by Eric Wang from Parity. He will be giving us a bird's eye overview of the Polkadot ecosystem, how DeFi works there and stuff, and like I believe a lot of interesting things. Without further ado, I'm giving out to Eric.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I'm going to give this presentation in the form of slides. So let me pull up my slides real quick and then we can begin. All right. So as Alex kindly mentioned, my name is Eric, and I'm the head of strategic growth projects at Parity Technologies. Today, my presentation is going to be centered around the Polkadot ecosystem, especially the developments of the Polkadot ecosystem in the last year until April 2022. When we talk about products within the ecosystem, there's really three types of things that we generally see. So the first type of product is a chain. So when I refer to chain, I'm usually referring to something like a Pairchain. It could be a pair thread, or it could be a paired chain that also serves as a bridge. There's also, of course, a number of dApps that are being built on top of these parachains and pair threads that generally serve as either direct consumer-facing applications or higher level protocols that kind of support these consumer applications. And these protocols could kind of be something like a stable coin, or they could be like a lending and borrowing protocol on more of like a DeFi context. Also, supporting these chains and dApps is a number of infrastructure components. These things could be stuff like tooling, various services, and various integrations to kind of help not only developers' lives make it easier, but also kind of end users as well. And I'm going to jump quickly into kind of the current broad level of adoption within the Polkadot ecosystem before diving deeper in the next session. So currently in the Polkadot ecosystem, there's about 14 live parachains. And by live parachain, I mean a parachain that's producing a block within the Polkadot relay chain, but they might not necessarily have their full functionality yet. And to achieve their full functionality, they generally need to undergo a runtime upgrade or something similar to kind of do that. And also as well, in parallel with running these parachains, there's also 5 additional crowd loans that are happening at the moment. So I would say generally since parachains have launched, the ecosystem has grown quite a bit in terms of live parachains. Not really going to talk about Kusama quite as much, although I'm going to mention maybe some Kusama applications here and there in this presentation as well. And one additional thing that I talked about last year in Polka DeFiance as well, but to kind of give stress again is actually in the past year from end of 2020 to end of 2021, Polkadot has fortunately increased its developer base by about 75% and is still kind of the number 2 developed ecosystem just behind Ethereum, even though ecosystems such as Cosmos, et cetera, have also kind of grown quite a bit as well. But this is pretty exciting because we think that there's quite a bit of growth still to be had in terms of developer adoption. So I think in the last year, we see Polkadot has completed some major technical milestones. So some milestones that are kind of like already happening or has happened and has continued to kind of grow in a sense are stuff like Polkadot Parachain auctions and Polkadot Parachain functionality and applications being live. Now, these things are still growing significantly, but I think in terms of like a technical concept, they've in the past year become something that's a little bit more mature now. Also something that's kind of launched technically, but it's still pretty early in terms of its technical implementation as well as level of adoption is Rust smart contracts. And finally, stuff that's launching soon, or as we internally in Parity like to call it, soon TM, because we don't necessarily promise either internally or externally the exact timeline by which something will be launched, is stuff like XCMP and interoperability with, and by external interoperability here, I mean interoperability between Polkadot Pairchains to chains that are outside of the Polkadot ecosystem, such as Ethereum. So firstly, I'd like to kind of begin with EVM supporting parachains. So what we see right now is that EVM supporting parachains have probably gotten the greatest level of adoption and kind of hype in the ecosystem of all types of parachains. And I think there's a few reasons for that. So one is in terms of like level of deployment, these parachains support external applications. So I think they can grow relatively large in terms of the things that kind of are built on top of them. And for platform chains, generally EVM chains include many builders who are familiar with kind of the virtual machine and Solidity, and it's generally the quickest way to onboard into any new ecosystem from other ecosystems, just because Solidity has historically been such a popular language. And something that these EVM supporting parachains I've seen them pitch is that they, for example, benefit strongly from the network effects of other chains, whether they're other EVM parachains or also stuff like Ethereum or other EVM supporting chains outside of the Polkadot ecosystem. And the next type of parachain I'd like to kind of talk about is application-specific parachains. And in both the DeFi and non-DeFi context, these are generally chains that don't necessarily support external applications, but more needs to be deployed on a more runtime level if kind of there's any upgrades or kind of changes needs to be made with these parachain applications, you could say. And generally speaking, the kind of progress of these applications after these parachains after they've become live has not quite been as fast per se as the EVM parachains just yet. And so chains like Equilibrium, Unique Network, and Nodal, they do quite different things, right? But besides Centrifuge right now, most of the application-specific parachains have not had really their full functionality and tokens been kind of deployed live yet. And as a result, kind of the level of live adoption for these chains are not fully proven or to be seen yet. With that being said, there's the variety of these parachains is so large that I think the next year, as stuff like Equilibrium or Unique Network becomes more kind of technically ready, we're also very excited to see significant adoption, hopefully, in these types of parachains as well. And next, something that's a little bit less known or less adopted in a sense are stuff like Rust smart contract supporting parachains and kind of Rust smart contracts in general. So Polkadot really enables very easy deployment of Rust smart contracts. And there's a few advantages that these Rust platforms might have over, let's say, EVM supporting parachain, such as, for example, better performance, Rust having, WASM, and using Rust to kind of code with WASM, giving better performance than something that can be kind of interpreted through EVM. Rust familiarity amongst traditional developers versus kind of having traditional non-blockchain developers learn Solidity, which is a completely new language. And based on kind of these factors, we're kind of seeing the very beginning of adoption in Rust smart contracts within the Polkadot ecosystem. And we kind of see in general, because right now it's kind of the blockchain ecosystem isn't quite as large as we want it to be just yet. It's about a medium barrier to entry for existing smart contract developers to kind of code on the Rust smart contracts. But we think that Rust smart contracts is a relatively unique thing within the Polkadot ecosystem. And this is something that I think we're pushing pretty heavily for people to understand as something that kind of does offer many technical advantages over existing EVM implementations that people should consider looking at. And the final type of parachain I'd like to talk about is bridge parachains. So currently, bridge parachains are at a pretty early stage of launching, but they haven't really quite been live with full functionality yet. A lot of people are really looking forward to these types of parachains being live because just as you kind of see within the broader blockchain ecosystem, bridges are pretty crucial, especially for DeFi, for kind of interoperability between Parachain and Parachain applications and stuff that's outside of Polkadot. And finally, kind of talk a little bit about Parachain applications, which are applications built on top of Parachains. I think that these applications have become very well adopted already, even though they've only kind of been live, let's say on Moonbeam and Akala, et cetera, very recently. And there's a few reasons. So when a user generally or a builder generally thinks about building on, let's say, Moonbeam, what they kind of the advantages that kind of they're pitched is that the user will get, for example, high performance because it's a parachain, which is kind of like dedicated towards specific, let's say in this case, in the case of Moonbeam, EVM kind of compatibility, as well as in addition to that, which is very unique to the Polkadot ecosystem, native interoperability with other parachains and parachain applications as well. And so kind of the interoperability aspect here, for example, Moonbeam applications be able to talk to Equilibrium, for example, will kind of confer potentially greater usage and liquidity for these applications, specific DeFi applications in this case. In this section, I'd finally like to talk about overall narratives that we see kind of amongst builders and kind of the adoption levels and kind of excitement levels of these narratives that we currently see. So just like the kind of level of technical deployment, stuff like parachains and parachain auctions and parachain functionality and parachain applications are relatively mature and kind of the level of deployment kind of already shows that even though they're growing significantly. Stuff that's maybe a little bit less understood, but emerging and rapidly kind of growing in terms of like stories that people, builders, as well as retail community generally understand are stuff like inter-parachain interoperability through XCMP, external interoperability, as well as EVM smart contracts. And stuff that really people don't quite understand, but either has been in the Polkadot ecosystem for quite a long time, such as the ability for Substrate, which is the SDK that's kind of generally used to build parachains, to support WebAssembly-based upgradability, and stuff like smart contracts built on Rust. Like these kind of concepts have not really quite caught on, even though I think they're very powerful, you could say, convincing points for people to build either a parachain or an application on top of parachains. As well as obviously pair threads are an idea that I think a lot of people don't quite understand yet, and it's also not technically available yet, but it's something that we also kind of foresee more adoption in the future as well. And finally, I'd like to kind of conclude this presentation with some slides about some of the opportunities that both builders as well as non-builders can kind of have within the ecosystem. So first, kind of something that's specifically targeted towards builders is, I mentioned this last year as well, but really the level of industry-leading ecosystem support that the Polkadot ecosystem has. So whether it's like on a technical level, an open source funding level, whatnot, I think we got you covered. So for example, technically speaking, if you're building a project and you want technical support, there's stuff like the Substrate Builders Program that can kind of help take your application from something that's maybe 5% complete to something that's a live parachain. We also have Substrate Delivery Partners to kind of help build out your technical solution. So these are a number of development shops that are kind of dedicated to some extent to kind of building out Substrate and Polkadot-based applications and chains. Also a number of community events such as this one, either hosted by Parity Web3 Foundation or people like Equilibrium or other community members. We have obviously an ambassador program, as well as a global meetups program, which basically allows people to host events and then eventually get reimbursed for it if they're Polkadot related. In terms of open source funding opportunities, a lot of projects have applied for the Web3 Foundation grants, but something that's maybe a lot less kind of actively discussed is the Polkadot treasury, which has a lot of DOT in both like absolute numbers as well as USD kind of numbers to be ready to kind of be spent on almost any idea as long as it passes the Polkadot governance. So something that at least Parity is really trying to push is to educate people in understanding that the Polkadot treasury is a thing, and that if you have a good idea, you should probably try to utilize that somehow. And there's always been a number of venture funding opportunities within the ecosystem, as well as incubators and accelerators. And in the last year, since last year, we've also begun starting a number of bespoke engagements and commercial agreements with various builders to kind of give them tailored support if they're not, for example, one of the things that I already mentioned. So I guess the point here is that no matter what kind of builder you are and what kind of support you need, I think there's potentially something that we can work out here that could kind of make your entry into Polkadot or make your development on Polkadot a little bit easier. And my final slide is more kind of targeted towards everybody, right? So within the last year, the obvious biggest development in Polkadot ecosystem is that Pairchains are live and there's stuff actually deployed there, right? So we really hope that you actually use Pairchains. So I asked internally within Parity, and some of the ideas that Parity members have kind of given around to potential community participants is, for example, get a Moonsama NFT and play around on Minecraft or kind of explore the metaverse. You could play around with DeFi chains like Equilibrium. You can create a Web3 identity on Kilt. You can interact with over the 100 applications available on Moonriver or dozens of applications on Moonbeam. You could, of course, participate in crowd loans, and there's, of course, so much more you can do as well. And with this, I'd like to end the presentation and happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. So we're going to be moving over to the panel in session 2. So for the audience, just hang tight, and you'll move over there automatically just momentarily. Thanks again. Have a great one, Eric.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, everyone.